When 12-year-old Eliza Hartwell's parents abandoned her to starve in a Montana blizzard, she thought her story was ending until a gruff, lonely rancher found her collapsed beside a cold hearth and chose to see Worth where her own family saw a burden. 5 years later, when those same parents returned demanding she come with them to their new life in Oregon Territory, Eliza must choose between the blood that abandoned her and the man who saved her soul. But will her newfound strength be enough to stand against the law that says children belong to their parents, no matter what those parents have done? Eliza's bare feet hit the frozen cabin floor like ice cubes dropping into water. The sound made her gasp and pull her legs back under the thin blanket, but the cold had already crawled up through her bones like tiny needles. She pressed her ear against the wooden wall, listening for the sound that had woken her from her restless sleep. Nothing. Just wind howling around the cabin corners like a hungry wolf. She sat up slowly, her empty stomach making angry noises that echoed in the dark room. 3 days had passed since her parents loaded their wagon and drove away into the white Montana wilderness. 3 days since her mother had kissed her forehead and whispered, "Be brave, little bird. We'll send for you when we can." 3 days of waiting. 3 days of watching the food disappear. 3 days of telling herself they would come back. The cabin felt bigger now, like it was stretching away from her in all directions. Every shadow looked like it might hide something dangerous. Every creak of the wooden walls sounded like footsteps. She pulled her mother's old shawl tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the faint smell of lavender soap that still clung to the worn fabric. Her stomach cramped again, harder this time. She had eaten the last piece of bread yesterday morning, chewing it slowly to make it last longer. The milk had frozen solid in the pitcher, and she had tried breaking off pieces with a kitchen knife, but it tasted like ice and made her teeth hurt. Eliza slipped her feet into her father's old boots, which were so big they made slapping sounds when she walked. She shuffled to the window and rubbed away the frost with her sleeve. Outside, the world looked like someone had covered everything with a thick white blanket. The snow reached almost to the bottom of the window and more kept falling from the dark sky. She remembered her father's words before he left, "You're 12 now, Eliza. That's old enough to take care of yourself for a while. We'll be back before the spring thaw, I promise." But what if they didn't come back before spring? What if they forgot about her? What if something happened to them on the dangerous mountain roads? Her breath made foggy circles on the glass as she stared out at the empty trail where their wagon had disappeared. She traced a heart in the frost with her finger, then quickly rubbed it away. Hearts were for people who had families that stayed together. The fire in the stone fireplace had died hours ago, leaving only cold ashes that looked like gray snow. She knew how to build a fire. Her father had taught her last summer, but the wood pile outside was buried under 3 feet of snow. Getting to it would mean opening the door and letting all the cold air rush inside. Eliza walked to the kitchen corner and opened the flour barrel even though she knew it was empty. She had scraped out the last handful 2 days ago and mixed it with snow to make a thin, tasteless soup. The cornmeal was gone too. So was the salt pork that had hung from the ceiling beam. She opened the cupboard doors one by one, hoping to find something she had missed. A forgotten can of peaches. A bag of beans hiding in the back corner. Even a single potato would be like finding treasure. Nothing. Her hands shook as she closed the last cupboard door. Not from the cold this time, but from something that felt bigger and scarier than winter. She was alone. Really, truly alone in a way she had never been before. The wind picked up outside, making the cabin shake like it was trying to knock the walls down. Snow began hitting the windows harder, making sharp tapping sounds like someone throwing pebbles. Each gust made the wooden beams groan and the door rattle in its frame. Eliza climbed back into the bed she shared with her parents, pulling all the blankets over her head. Under the covers, she could pretend it was summer. She could pretend her mother was humming in the kitchen while making breakfast. She could pretend her father was outside chopping wood and would come in soon, stamping the snow off his boots and complaining about the weather. But pretending didn't make her stomach stop hurting. Pretending didn't make the cabin warmer. Pretending didn't bring her parents back. She must have fallen asleep because the next thing she knew, gray light was coming through the window. The storm had stopped and everything outside looked peaceful and quiet. Too quiet. Even the wind had stopped blowing. Eliza forced herself to get up and put on her coat, which had once been her mother's and hung down past her knees. She wrapped the shawl around her head like a hood and pushed open the front door. The cold hit her like a slap across the face. Her breath came out in white puffs that disappeared almost instantly. The snow was so deep it reached her waist, and each step forward took enormous effort. Her legs sank down until she was almost swimming through the white powder. She made it to the woodpile, which looked like a small mountain covered in snow. Using her bare hands, she dug into the white heap, trying to find the split logs her father had stacked there in the fall. Her fingers quickly became so cold they felt like they didn't belong to her anymore. Finally, she found a piece of wood. Then another. Then 3 more. She gathered them against her chest and struggled back toward the cabin, falling twice in the deep snow. By the time she reached the door, her feet had no feeling left in them. Inside, she knelt by the fireplace and tried to remember everything her father had taught her about fire building. Kindling first, small pieces of bark and twigs to catch the spark. Then bigger pieces. Then the logs. But the matches were running low. She counted them carefully. 8 left. 8 chances to start a fire that would keep her from freezing. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the first match. When she struck it against the box, it broke in half. The second match lit but went out before she could get it to the kindling. The third match caught the bark and she held her breath as the tiny flame grew bigger. But the wood was damp from snow and the fire died before it could really start. 7 matches left. Eliza sat back on her heels and tried not to cry. Crying wouldn't help anything. Crying was for babies and she was 12 years old. Old enough to take care of herself, her father had said. She tried again with the 4th match and this time she was more careful. She blew gently on the tiny flame, feeding it small pieces of bark until it grew strong enough to catch the bigger wood. Smoke began rising up the chimney and she felt a warm glow of success in her chest. But the fire needed constant attention. Every few minutes she had to add more wood or adjust the logs to keep the flames going. And the wood she had brought inside wouldn't last very long. As the day wore on, Eliza realized something that made her feel sick with fear. She was going to have to choose between staying warm and saving her strength. Each trip outside to get more wood took energy she didn't have. Each hour without food made her weaker. By evening, she was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. The fire had died down to glowing coals and she didn't have the energy to go outside for more wood. She crawled into bed with all her clothes on, pulling every blanket in the cabin over her shivering body. Outside, she could hear the wind starting to blow again. Another storm was coming. As she lay in the darkness, listening to her stomach make empty, angry sounds, Eliza made herself a promise. Tomorrow, she would be brave. Tomorrow, she would figure out how to survive until her parents came back. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to think about, a small voice whispered a terrible question: what if tomorrow was too late? Samuel Mackenzie's horse snorted white clouds into the freezing air as they picked their way down the narrow trail toward the Hartwell place. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones the same way he could feel bad weather coming. No smoke had risen from their chimney in 3 days, and in weather like this, that meant trouble. His gloved hands gripped the reins tighter as he guided his mare, Sage, around a fallen tree branch heavy with snow. The Hartwells weren't the friendliest neighbors. William had a drinking problem and Margaret kept to herself, but they had a young daughter. Samuel had seen her a few times at the general store in town, a thin girl with serious gray eyes who always stayed close to her mother's skirts. "Easy, girl," he murmured to his horse as they approached the cabin. Sage's ears flicked nervously and she tossed her head like she could smell something that made her uncomfortable. The cabin looked dead. That was the only word for it. Snow had piled up against the door like nature was trying to bury the whole building. No tracks led to or from the house. Most telling of all, the windows were dark and frost covered them so thick he couldn't see inside. Samuel dismounted and tied Sage to a fence post, then waded through the knee-deep snow to the front door. His boots made squeaking sounds in the cold powder, the only noise in a world that seemed frozen silent. "Hello, the house," he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the still air. "Hartwell? You folks all right in there?" "Nothing." He knocked on the wooden door, harder than he intended. The sound was sharp and loud, like a gunshot in the quiet. Still no answer from inside. Samuel tried the door handle. It wasn't locked, which surprised him. Out here, people usually secured their homes, especially when they planned to be away. The door opened with a groan that sounded like it was complaining about the cold. The smell hit him first. Stale air, cold ashes, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Something that made his stomach tighten with worry. He stepped inside, and his eyes took a moment to adjust to the dim light filtering through the frosted windows. The cabin was a mess. Cupboard doors hung open, showing empty shelves. Drawers had been pulled out and left that way like someone had been searching for something important. A thin layer of snow had blown in through cracks around the windows, covering everything with a fine white dust. But it was the lump near the fireplace that made his heart stop. A small figure lay curled on the floor, wrapped in blankets and wearing what looked like a woman's shawl. So still that for a terrible moment, Samuel thought he was too late. He rushed forward and dropped to his knees beside the bundle. "Hey there," he said softly, reaching out to touch what he hoped was a shoulder. "Can you hear me?" The bundle moved slightly and Samuel felt relief flood through him like warm water. Still alive then? He carefully pulled back the edge of a blanket and found himself looking at a girl's face, pale as the snow outside but definitely breathing. Her eyes fluttered open and Samuel found himself staring into the most frightened gaze he had ever seen. The girl tried to pull away from him, but she was too weak to do more than flinch. "It's all right," Samuel said, keeping his voice as gentle as he could manage. His own voice sounded rusty from too many days alone on his ranch. "I'm here to help. What's your name?" The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted around the cabin like she was looking for someone else, someone who wasn't there. "Eliza," she finally whispered, and her voice sounded like dry leaves rustling. "I'm Eliza." Samuel nodded, trying to keep his expression calm even though anger was building in his chest like a slow fire. Where were her parents? What kind of people left a child alone in weather like this? "Eliza's a pretty name," he said. "I'm Samuel Mackenzie. I live over the ridge, about 5 miles from here. Where are your folks, honey?" Eliza's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back quickly. "They went to Oregon," she said. "To find work. They said they'd come back." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. Oregon Territory was hundreds of miles away, through mountain passes that would be impassable until spring. Even if the Hartwells had intended to return quickly, they would have been trapped by the weather just like everyone else. They had abandoned their daughter. Samuel felt his jaw clench, but he forced himself to stay calm. The girl needed help, not anger. He could be angry later when she was safe and warm and fed. "When did they leave?" he asked. "For days ago," Eliza whispered. "Maybe 5. I stopped counting. 5 days. 5 days without heat, without food, without anyone to check on her." Samuel marveled that she was still alive. "Well, you're not staying here another minute," he said, making his voice sound more confident than he felt. "I'm taking you to my place. You'll be warm there and I've got plenty of food." Eliza's eyes widened with something that might have been hope, but then her expression became guarded again. "You don't have to," she said. "I can take care of myself. Papa said I was old enough." The words made Samuel's heart ache. This little girl, barely more than skin and bones, trying to convince herself she could survive alone in a Montana winter. Trying to believe her father's lie because the truth was too terrible to face. "Maybe you can take care of yourself," Samuel said carefully. "But that doesn't mean you should have to. Sometimes it's okay to let someone help." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't move, he gently scooped her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like a bird with hollow bones. Eliza didn't fight him, but he could feel the tension in her small body. She held herself stiff and ready to run, even though she didn't have the strength to stand on her own. "My horse is right outside," Samuel said as he carried her toward the door. "Her name is Sage, and she's the gentlest mare in all of Montana. You'll ride with me, and we'll be at my place before dark." "What about my things?" Eliza asked, looking back at the cabin. Samuel paused in the doorway. The cabin was cold and empty, with nothing worth saving except maybe some clothes. But he understood that even small possessions could mean everything to a child who had lost everything else. "What do you need?" he asked. Eliza was quiet for a moment. "There's a picture," she finally said, "of my grandmother. It's in the drawer by the bed." Samuel set her gently on Sage's back, then went back inside to find the picture. It was a small daguerreotype in a tarnished silver frame, showing a stern-looking woman with Eliza's same gray eyes. He tucked it carefully inside his coat, then climbed up behind Eliza. "Got it," he said, showing her the frame. The relief on her face was worth the extra trip. As they rode away from the abandoned cabin, Samuel felt Eliza begin to relax against his chest. The rigid tension slowly left her body, and he thought he heard her sigh softly. "Mr. Mackenzie?" she said after they had ridden in silence for several minutes. "Just Samuel," he said. "What is it, honey? Why are you helping me?" The question was so quiet he almost missed it over the sound of Sage's hooves in the snow. Samuel thought about that for a long moment. He could have told her about his own childhood, about being passed from relative to relative after his parents died of fever. He could have explained how it felt to be unwanted, to always wonder if today would be the day someone decided you were too much trouble. Instead, he said simply, because everyone deserves to have someone who cares about them. Eliza was quiet after that, but Samuel felt some of the last tension leave her small frame. By the time they reached his ranch, she had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her breathing deep and even for the first time in days. As Samuel carefully lifted her down from the horse, he made a silent promise. Whatever happened next, this child would never go hungry again. She would never spend another night wondering if anyone in the world cared whether she lived or died. But as he carried her toward his warm cabin, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that keeping that promise might be harder than he expected. Blood soaked through the bandage on Eliza's palm as she tried to milk the stubborn cow for the third time that morning. The animal kicked again, sending the metal bucket clanging across the barn floor and splashing what little milk she'd managed to collect into the dirt. "Easy there, Buttercup," Samuel's voice came from behind her, gentle but amused. "She can smell your fear from here to Sunday." Eliza wiped her bleeding hand on her apron, fighting back tears of frustration. 3 weeks had passed since Samuel brought her to his ranch, and every simple task felt like climbing a mountain. "I can't do anything right," she whispered. Samuel picked up the overturned bucket and settled onto the milking stool beside her. "Watch," he said, his weathered hands moving with surprising gentleness as he spoke softly to the cow. "Buttercup here lost her calf last spring. Makes her jumpy around strangers. But if you talk to her like she matters." The milk began flowing steadily into the bucket, creating a rhythm that somehow made the barn feel safer. Eliza watched Samuel's face as he worked, noticing how his hard features softened when he thought no one was looking. "Why do you live alone?" she asked suddenly. Samuel's hands paused for just a moment before continuing their work. "Same reason you ended up alone, I reckon. Sometimes life takes away the people you love." "Did you have children?" The milk stopped flowing. Samuel stood up slowly, his back to her. "Had a son once. Tommy. He'd be about your age now if." He cleared his throat. "Fever took him and his mama when he was barely walking." Eliza felt something twist in her chest. "I'm sorry. Long time ago." Samuel handed her the bucket of fresh milk. "Point is, everyone's got reasons for being where they are. Question is what you do with the time you get." That afternoon, Samuel taught her to fix the broken fence that separated his land from the open range. Her hands were too small for the heavy tools, but he showed her how to hold the wire steady while he hammered. "Coyote's been testing this fence all winter," he explained. "They're smart. They know exactly where the weak spots are." Like people, Eliza said, thinking of how her parents had found her weakest moment to leave. Samuel looked at her sharply. "No, not like people. Coyotes hunt because they have to. People." He drove another nail with more force than necessary. "People choose." As they worked, Eliza noticed how Samuel's shoulders tensed whenever a rider appeared on the distant road. She'd seen that same tension in her father whenever bill collectors came around. "Are you afraid of something?" she asked. Samuel set down his hammer. "Not afraid. Careful. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Afraid means you stop living. Careful means you pay attention to what's trying to stop you from living." That evening, as Eliza helped prepare supper, she discovered Samuel couldn't read. She found him staring at a letter that had arrived with the mail, his lips moving silently as he traced the words with one finger. "Would you like me to read it?" she offered quietly. Samuel's face flushed red. "Don't need help from a child." "I'm not helping because you need it," Eliza said, remembering how he'd made her feel useful in the barn. "I'm helping because I want to." The letter was from a man named Patterson in town asking about buying cattle. As Eliza read aloud, she watched Samuel's expression change from embarrassment to gratitude. "How'd you learn to read so well?" he asked when she finished. "Mama taught me before." Eliza touched the shawl she still wore every day. "Before things got hard." She said words were the one thing nobody could take away from you. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Your mama was right about that. Will you teach me ranch work if I teach you reading?" Samuel's weathered face cracked into the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Reckon that's a fair trade." The next morning brought their first real test. Eliza woke to the sound of Samuel cursing in the yard. She rushed to the window and saw 3 of his horses running loose, the gate to their pasture hanging open. "Storm must have blown it loose," Samuel called to her as he grabbed his rope. "Need all hands for this." Eliza had never been on a horse, but Samuel boosted her onto his gentle mare, Sage. "Just hold tight and let her do the thinking," he said. The chase lasted 2 hours across rolling hills still patched with snow. Every time they got close to the runaway horses, something spooked them into running again. Eliza's legs ached, her hands were raw from gripping the reins, but she refused to quit. There, Samuel pointed toward a narrow canyon. If we can get them in there, they'll have nowhere to run. Working together, they managed to herd the horses into the canyon. But just as Samuel was closing in with his rope, his own horse stepped in a prairie dog hole and went down hard. Eliza watched in horror as Samuel hit the ground and didn't get up. His horse limped away, favoring its front leg. The loose horses scattered again. "Mr. Mackenzie!" Eliza slid down from Sage and ran to where Samuel lay groaning. "Legs busted," he gasped, his face pale with pain. "Need to get back to the house." Eliza looked around at the empty prairie stretching for miles in every direction. The sun was setting and the temperature was dropping fast. Samuel couldn't walk and she wasn't strong enough to lift him. "What do we do?" she asked, fighting down panic. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, thinking, "You're going to have to ride for help. I don't know the way. Follow the creek north until you hit the main road. Then head east toward town. Find Doc Morrison." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd never been to town alone, barely knew how to ride, and darkness was coming fast. But Samuel was depending on her. "What if I get lost?" Samuel reached up and squeezed her hand. "You won't. You're stronger than you know." The ride to town took 3 hours in the growing darkness. Twice Sage stumbled on the rough ground. Once, Eliza almost fell off when an owl spooked the horse. But she kept going, driven by the image of Samuel lying helpless in the cold. Doc Morrison was a thin man with kind eyes who asked no questions when Eliza burst into his office babbling about broken legs and lost horses. He hitched up his wagon immediately. "You did good, child," he said as they raced back across the prairie. Not many folks would have kept their heads in a situation like that. They found Samuel where she'd left him, though he was shivering badly and barely conscious. Doc Morrison worked by lantern light, setting the broken bone and wrapping it tight. "He'll be laid up for weeks," the doctor told Eliza as they loaded Samuel into the wagon. "Somebody's going to have to take care of the ranch." Eliza looked back at the dark prairie where Samuel's loose horses were still running free. She thought about the milk cow that needed tending, the chickens that needed feeding, the 100 daily tasks that kept a ranch running. "I'll do it," she said. Doc Morrison raised his eyebrows. "You're just a child. I'm the only help he's got." The next morning, Eliza woke before dawn and stumbled to the barn in the gray light. Her whole body ached from the long ride, but she had work to do. Buttercup the cow was waiting, her udder swollen with milk. "Easy, girl," Eliza whispered, settling onto the milking stool. "We're both learning here." This time, the milk flowed smoothly into the bucket. Maybe it was because her hands were steadier, or maybe because she wasn't afraid anymore. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Samuel watched from his bed as she carried in the full bucket of milk, his eyes bright with something she couldn't name. "Proud of you," he said simply. Those 3 words warmed her more than any fire ever had. But outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and Eliza had no idea that her biggest test was still coming. The sound of hoofbeats on frozen ground made Eliza drop the armload of firewood she'd been carrying. Through the kitchen window, she could see 3 men on horseback approaching the house, their breath making white clouds in the cold morning air. Samuel struggled to sit up in his bed, wincing as his broken leg shifted under the blankets. "Help me to the chair by the window," he said, his voice tight with pain and something else, worry. Eliza had grown stronger in the 2 weeks since Samuel's accident, but she still struggled to support his weight as he hobbled across the room. Outside, the lead rider dismounted with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who wanted to be noticed. "That's Sheriff Davis," Samuel muttered, settling into the chair. "The other 2 are his deputies, Miller and Webb." "What do they want?" Eliza asked, though something cold in her stomach already knew the answer wouldn't be good. "Trouble," Samuel said simply. "Stay close to me and let me do the talking." Sheriff Davis knocked on the door with the heavy sound of authority. He was a big man with small, suspicious eyes and a badge that caught the morning light like a warning signal. "Morning, Mackenzie," Davis said as Samuel called for them to enter. "Heard you took a tumble. Shame about the leg. What brings you out this way, Davis?" Samuel's voice was steady, but Eliza could see his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Davis's eyes found Eliza and stayed there. "Actually, we came about the girl. Got some questions that need answering." Eliza felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. She moved closer to Samuel's chair, drawing comfort from his presence. "What kind of questions?" Samuel asked. Well, for starters, what exactly is your relationship to this child? Davis's tone made the word relationship sound dirty. Far as anyone knows, you got no legal claim to her. I found her half dead and took her in. That's all the claim I need. Deputy Miller spoke up from near the door. That ain't how the law sees it, Mackenzie. Young girl living alone with a bachelor man, it don't look proper. Eliza's cheeks burned with shame and anger. She wanted to tell these men that Samuel had saved her life, that he was the kindest person she'd ever known. But their stares made her feel small and wrong, like she was the problem just by existing. Been getting complaints, Davis continued. Some folks in town think maybe you took advantage of a desperate situation. Maybe convinced this girl to stay when she should have been looking for her real family. Her real family left her to die. Samuel's voice was dangerously quiet. So you say. But we only got your word for that. Davis pulled out a small notebook and flipped through it. Mrs. Henderson at the general store says you've been buying dresses and shoes for the girl. Hair ribbons too. Seems mighty interested in keeping her happy. The way Davis said it made Samuel's kindness sound like something twisted and wrong. Eliza saw Samuel's face go red with anger. Those things were necessities, Samuel said through gritted teeth. Child can't run around in rags. Course not, Deputy Webb chimed in with a nasty smile. Got to keep her looking nice. Eliza finally found her voice. He's been nothing but good to me. You don't understand, Hush now, child, Davis said, not unkindly. Adults are talking. The dismissal stung worse than a slap. These men looked at her and saw only a problem to be solved, not a person with thoughts and feelings of her own. Samuel leaned forward in his chair despite the pain it caused. Say what you came to say, Davis. Town council's been meeting about the situation. They think the girl would be better off in proper care. There's a church orphanage in Helena that takes in children with uncertain circumstances. The words hit Eliza like ice water. Helena was 300 miles away, full of strangers who would see her as just another mouth to feed. She'd heard stories about those places, gray buildings where children learned to expect nothing and got even less. She's not going anywhere, Samuel said flatly. That ain't your decision to make. Davis closed his notebook with a snap. We got the authority to take custody of any child who ain't got proper guardianship. And who decides what's proper? Samuel asked. The law does. And the law says an unmarried man got no business raising a young girl, especially one that ain't his kin. Eliza wanted to scream that Samuel was more family to her than her own parents had ever been. He taught her to read better, showed her how to care for animals, and never once made her feel like a burden. But these men had already made up their minds. Besides, Deputy Miller added, winter's been hard on everyone. Man with a busted leg can't work his ranch proper. How you planning to feed another mouth when you can't even take care of yourself? The question hit home. Eliza had been doing her best to keep up with the daily chores, but she knew the ranch was suffering. 3 horses were still missing from Samuel's fall. The roof leaked in 2 places. The fence line needed repairs they couldn't afford. We're managing fine, Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Davis looked around the modest cabin, taking in the patched furniture and worn rugs. This ain't no place for a growing girl. She needs schooling, proper clothes, women to teach her how to be a lady. What she needs is someone who cares about her, Samuel shot back. Maybe, but caring ain't enough when you can't provide. Davis stood up, his decision clearly made. We'll be back next week with the proper papers. Have her things ready. As the 3 men filed out, Eliza felt her world crumbling again. Just when she'd started to believe in safety, in belonging somewhere, it was being ripped away by strangers who thought they knew what was best for her. Samuel sat in stunned silence for a long moment after the door closed. Then he looked at Eliza with pain that had nothing to do with his broken leg. I won't let them take you, he said quietly. But Eliza could hear the doubt in his voice. How could one injured man fight the law? That afternoon, while Samuel dozed in his chair, Eliza walked to the edge of the property where the fence separated their land from the open range. The missing horses were out there somewhere, probably joining wild herds by now. Without them, Samuel couldn't work his ranch properly. Without income from the ranch, he couldn't prove he could support her. The math was simple and heartbreaking. She leaned against a fence post and let herself cry for the first time since Samuel had found her. Not the quiet tears of hunger and cold she'd shed in her parents' abandoned cabin, but deep, angry sobs that came from somewhere much deeper. It ain't fair, she said to the empty prairie. The wind carried her words away without an answer. That evening, a neighbor named Mrs. Chin stopped by with a pot of soup. She was a small Chinese woman whose husband worked the railroad and she'd always been kind to Eliza in town. Heard about your trouble, she said, settling into a chair by Samuel's bed. Come to see if there's anything I can do. Samuel's face brightened at the first friendly voice he'd heard all day. Much obliged, Mrs. Chen. Been a hard day. Mrs. Chen looked at Eliza, who was stirring the soup at the stove. Sheriff Davis been talking all over town. Says the girl ain't safe here. That's nonsense, Samuel said hotly. I know that. You know that. But Davis got the ear of important folks. Mrs. Chen lowered her voice. My husband heard him talking to Judge Patterson yesterday. They already decided what they're gonna do. Eliza's spoon clattered against the pot. What did they decide? Mrs. Chen hesitated, then spoke carefully. Orphanage in Helena. They're sending papers this week. The soup suddenly smelled wrong, too rich and heavy. Eliza felt sick to her stomach. There's something else, Mrs. Chen continued. Word is, if you fight this, they might look real close at how you came to have the girl in the first place. Might decide you took her legal-like. Samuel went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying be careful how hard you push back. Some fights cost more than losing. After Mrs. Chen left, Eliza and Samuel sat in heavy silence. The cabin felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in around them. There has to be something we can do, Eliza said finally. Samuel stared into the fire, his face hard with thinking. Maybe there is, but it would mean leaving everything behind. Starting over somewhere they can't find us. You do that? Leave your ranch. Samuel looked at her with eyes that held no doubt. Child, this ranch is just land and buildings. Your family. The word family hung in the air between them like a promise. But outside, winter wind rattled the windows with a sound like footsteps, and Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out faster than they knew. The school bell that usually called children to learning now rang like a death knell, and Eliza's stomach twisted into knots as tight as the ribbons on her best dress. Saturday morning had arrived gray and cold, matching the faces of the townspeople filing into the one-room schoolhouse where her future would be decided by strangers who barely knew her name. Samuel straightened his tie for the third time, his weathered hands shaking slightly. Remember what we talked about, he whispered as they climbed the wooden steps. Tell the truth, but don't let them scare you. Inside, the smell of chalk dust mixed with nervous sweat and winter coats. Eliza counted 17 people crammed into a space meant for 12, their whispered conversations buzzing like angry bees. Mrs. Patterson from the general store sat in the front row, her lips pressed together like she'd tasted something sour. Behind her, Doc Williams nodded at Eliza with kind eyes, while his wife deliberately looked away. All rise for the territorial hearing, announced Sheriff Davis, though he seemed more uncomfortable than official in his Sunday suit. We're here to decide the matter of one Eliza Hartwell and her proper guardianship. Councilman Barrett shuffled his papers importantly, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the morning light streaming through dirty windows. At 52 years old, he'd made every important decision in this town for the past decade, and his expression suggested he planned to make this one too. Mr. Mackenzie, Barrett began, his voice carrying the weight of authority, you claim you found this child abandoned and near death. Can you prove these claims? Samuel stood slowly, his hat in his hands. I can show you the cabin where I found her. Still got the empty food barrels, the cold fireplace. Doc Williams here can tell you what condition she was in. Doc Williams cleared his throat and rose. The child was suffering from severe malnutrition and exposure. Another day or two and... He shook his head grimly. Samuel Mackenzie saved her life, no question about it. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eliza saw some faces soften, but others remained hard as stone. That may be, Barrett continued, but the law is clear about proper guardianship. A single man, living alone with a young girl, presents certain improprieties. What improprieties? Samuel's voice carried a dangerous edge. I've treated the girl like my own daughter. Asked nothing from her but to heal and grow strong. Mrs. Patterson stood up suddenly, her face flushed. That's all well and good, but what do we really know about you, Mackenzie? You came here 5 years ago with no family, no references. For all we know, you could be running from something. Eliza felt her chest tighten. She'd never thought about Samuel's past, never wondered why a man would choose to live alone on the frontier. Now doubt crept into her mind like cold through a broken window. My past is my own business, Samuel replied quietly, but I've never hurt a soul in this town. Can't say the same for parents who abandon their children. Speaking of which, Barrett interjected, pulling out a letter, we've received correspondence from the territorial authorities. There's an orphanage in Helena specifically designed for children in these situations. Clean facilities, proper education, moral guidance from trained professionals. Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. She'd heard stories about those places, rows of beds filled with forgotten children, gray walls that echoed with loneliness, rules that crushed spirits like bugs under boots. I won't go, she said quietly, but in the tense silence, her words carried to every corner of the room. Barrett's eyebrows rose above his glasses. Child, you don't understand the complexities of this situation. Sometimes adults must make difficult decisions for your own good. Like my parents did? The words escaped before Eliza could stop them, sharper than she intended. They made a decision for my own good too. Left me to die because it was easier than finding another solution. The room fell dead silent. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Now see here, Mrs. Patterson began, but Eliza stood up, her legs unsteady but her voice growing stronger. No, you see here. She looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes that would look back. Everyone's talking about what's proper and what's legal and what's best for me. But nobody's asked what I want. Barrett leaned forward, his expression condescending. Child, you're too young to understand. I understand plenty. Eliza's voice cut through his words like an axe through kindling. I understand that when I was dying, only one person in this whole territory cared enough to help. I understand that Mr. Mackenzie taught me to read and write and think for myself. I understand that he never once raised his hand to me or spoke to me with cruelty. Her voice broke slightly, but she pushed forward. And I understand that some of you think there's something wrong with a man who'd show kindness to a child without wanting something back. But maybe that says more about you than it does about him. The silence stretched tight as a fiddle string. Eliza could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Samuel's pride radiating from beside her like warmth from a fire. Then Widow Thompson, who'd lost her own husband 3 winters ago, stood up slowly. The girl speaks sense, she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience. I've watched Mackenzie at church, seen how he treats that child. There's nothing improper about it. Just a lonely man and a lost girl who found each other. That's very touching, Barrett replied, his patience clearly wearing thin, but sentiment doesn't supersede law. The territorial government has made its position clear. Single men cannot serve as guardians for unrelated children, particularly girls approaching womanhood. Dr. Williams stood again. What if he weren't single? The question hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. Everyone turned to stare at the doctor, including Samuel, whose face had gone pale. What do you mean? Barrett asked slowly. Marriage, Dr. Williams said simply. If Mackenzie were married, the guardianship concerns would disappear. The child would have both a father and mother figure. Eliza felt the floor seem to tilt beneath her feet. Marriage? But to whom? Samuel had never mentioned any woman, never even looked twice at the ladies who brought him pies after church. That's ridiculous, Mrs. Patterson snorted. Who would he marry? There aren't exactly eligible women lining up to marry a rough rancher. I would. The voice came from the back of the room, soft but clear. Everyone turned to see Sarah Mitchell, the schoolteacher, standing with her hands folded calmly in front of her. At 28, she was considered a spinster by most standards, too educated and independent for the local men's tastes. Miss Mitchell, Barrett sputtered, surely you're not serious. I'm perfectly serious. Sarah walked slowly down the center aisle, her brown hair pinned back neatly, her green dress simple but elegant. Mr. Mackenzie is a good man, and Eliza is a remarkable young woman. I've watched them together at church functions. They're already a family in everything but law. Samuel stared at her in shock. Miss Mitchell, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, Sarah replied, stopping beside their bench. But I want to. I've been alone for 10 years, teaching other people's children while longing for my own family. This would give me that chance and give Eliza the female guidance the council seems to think she needs. Barrett looked like he'd swallowed a bee. This is highly irregular. You can't simply arrange a marriage in the middle of a hearing. Why not? Widow Thompson called out. Happens all the time on the frontier. Practical marriages, they're called. People finding solutions to life's problems. Besides, Dr. Williams added with a slight smile, it solves all the legal concerns, doesn't it? Mackenzie would be married, providing proper moral guidance. Miss Mitchell would gain a family. And Eliza would stay where she's wanted and loved. Eliza looked between Samuel and Sarah, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was happening so fast, spinning beyond anything she'd imagined. Mr. Mackenzie, she whispered, you don't have to do this for me. Samuel looked down at her, his blue eyes serious. Child, I'd do anything for you. But this has to be Miss Mitchell's choice too. Sarah knelt beside Eliza's bench, bringing herself to eye level with the girl. Eliza, I've watched you grow this past year. You're intelligent, kind, and stronger than most adults I know. I would be honored to be part of your family if you'll have me. Tears stung Eliza's eyes. After so much loss, so much uncertainty, the idea of gaining not just safety but an actual family seemed too good to be true. You really want this? Not just because of the hearing. Sarah smiled and Eliza saw genuine warmth there, not just duty. I really want this. I've been lonely too, you know. Teaching children all day, then going home to an empty house. The idea of having people to care for, to share meals with, to worry about. Yes, I want this very much. Barrett was shuffling through his papers frantically. There are still procedures to follow, licenses to obtain, waiting periods. Actually, Sheriff Davis spoke up, looking almost amused. Reverend Miller is here today. As a territorial minister, he has the authority to perform marriages immediately if all parties consent. All eyes turned to the elderly minister who'd been sitting quietly in the corner. He stood slowly, his white beard neatly trimmed, his eyes twinkling with something that might have been mischief. Well, he said, his voice carrying easily through the room, I've married couples for 40 years and I've learned to recognize when God's hand is moving. I see no reason to delay if everyone is willing. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Eliza felt like she was caught in a whirlwind, events spinning faster than she could follow. Right now, she asked. Here. Why not? Samuel said, and for the first time all day he smiled. Seems fitting, doesn't it? All these people already gathered, bearing witness to something important. Sarah laughed, a sound like silver bells. It's not exactly how I pictured my wedding day, but then again, nothing about frontier life goes according to plan. Barrett was turning red. This is absurd. You can't solve legal matters with impromptu ceremonies. Actually, Dr. Williams said, clearly enjoying himself, I believe that's exactly what frontier justice is about. Finding practical solutions to real problems. Reverend Miller moved to the front of the room, opening his worn Bible. Samuel Mackenzie, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and protect, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? Samuel looked at Sarah, then at Eliza, then back at Sarah. I do. Sarah Mitchell, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and honor, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? Sarah's voice was steady and sure. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Samuel and Sarah exchanged a brief, shy kiss while the room erupted in a mixture of applause and stunned silence. Eliza felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in months, they were tears of joy. Barrett slammed his gavel down repeatedly. This hearing is not over. The territorial authorities must still be notified. There are forms to file. But his protests were drowned out by the celebration around him. Widow Thompson was crying happy tears, Dr. Williams was shaking hands with everyone in reach, and even Sheriff Davis was grinning. Eliza stood between her new parents, for that's what they were now, legally and truly, and felt something she'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she belonged somewhere. That she was wanted not just by one person but by two people who had chosen to build their lives around loving her. But even as the celebration swirled around them, she couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles weren't over yet. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and something in the wind whispered of challenges still to come. 3 months after the wedding, Eliza was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the sound that turned her blood to ice water, the familiar creak and jangle of her father's wagon rolling up the dusty road toward their ranch. She dropped the wet sheet she'd been holding and stood frozen, watching the vehicle emerge from the heat shimmer like a bad dream made real. Sarah appeared at her side instantly, as if sensing danger. Who is it? She asked quietly, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. My parents, Eliza whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. They're back. William Hartwell looked exactly the same weathered face, same cold eyes, same way of sitting in the wagon seat like he owned everything he could see. Margaret sat beside him, thinner than before, her dress new but her expression unchanged. Hard. Calculating. Empty of any warmth a mother should feel seeing her daughter after nearly a year apart. Samuel emerged from the barn, his rifle in his hands but pointed at the ground. His face was calm, but Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he positioned himself between the wagon and his family. Well, William called out as he climbed down from the driver's seat, look what we have here. Our little girl's grown up some, hasn't she, Margaret? Margaret's eyes swept over Eliza with the same expression she'd used to examine livestock at market. She's filled out. Looks healthy. You've been feeding her well, I see. We've been taking care of her, Sarah said firmly, stepping forward to stand beside Samuel. As parents should. William's gaze shifted to Sarah and his smile turned ugly. Parents, is it? Last I heard, you were just the schoolteacher. Though I suppose congratulations are in order. He gestured at the simple gold band on Sarah's finger. Heard about your little courthouse wedding. Very convenient. What do you want, Hartwell? Samuel's voice was steady, but Eliza could hear the warning underneath. What do I want? William laughed, but there was no humor in it. I want my daughter back, of course. We've come to take her home. The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. She'd known this moment might come, had nightmares about it, but hearing it spoken aloud made her legs weak with terror. She is home, Sarah said quietly. This is her home now. Margaret finally spoke, her voice sharp as broken glass. Home is with blood family. Not with strangers who took advantage of a desperate situation. Took advantage? Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle. We saved her life. So you say. William pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. But according to territorial law, children belong with their natural parents unless those parents are proven unfit. And I don't see any court documents declaring us unfit, do you? Eliza felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She'd thought the hearing 3 months ago had settled everything, had made her safe forever. But apparently the law was more complicated than a 12-year-old girl could understand. You abandoned her, Sarah said, her teacher's voice carrying clearly across the yard. Left her alone in winter with no food, no heat, no way to survive. How's that not proof of being unfit? Margaret's face twisted into something ugly. Times were hard. We did what we had to do. That's not abandonment, that's survival. It's exactly abandonment, Samuel said. And if you think we're going to let you take her back just so you can dump her again when things get difficult, you're dead wrong. William's expression darkened. You don't have a choice, Mackenzie. Law's the law. She's our daughter, born of our blood, and we're taking her back. Eliza found her voice at last, though it came out smaller than she wanted. What if I don't want to go? William's cold eyes fixed on her. What you want doesn't matter, girl. Children don't get to choose. You belong to us until you're 18, and that's the end of it. Actually, Sarah said, children do have some say in matters of custody, especially when there are questions of abandonment or abuse. Margaret stepped down from the wagon, her face flushed with anger. Abuse? We never laid a hand on her. Leaving a child to starve and freeze is abuse, Sarah replied calmly. Any territorial judge would agree. Would they? William smiled and the expression made Eliza's skin crawl. Because we've been to see Judge Morrison and Helena. Had a long talk about our situation. Seems he has some interesting opinions about school teachers who break up families and ranchers who steal children. Samuel's face went pale. Judge Morrison was known throughout the territory for his strict interpretation of family law and his belief that children belonged with their birth parents no matter what. He's expecting us back within the week, William continued, his voice now smooth as oil. With our daughter. He's promised to expedite the custody hearing. Eliza felt panic rising in her throat like bile. Judge Morrison would send her back to these people who saw her as property, not as a person. She'd lose everything, her home, her family, her future. Please, she whispered, the word torn from her heart. Please don't make me go. For just a moment, something flickered across Margaret's face. Was it guilt? Regret? But it vanished so quickly Eliza might have imagined it. Pack your things, William said firmly. We leave in the morning. No. The word exploded from Eliza's chest with surprising force. No, I won't go. You can't make me. William's face went dark as a storm cloud. Girl, you'll do as you're told or dash. Or what? Samuel stepped forward, his rifle rising slightly. You'll beat her? Starve her again? Seems to me you've shown your true colors already. You threatening me, Mackenzie? William's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. The air in the yard suddenly felt electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Eliza could see disaster approaching fast as a runaway horse, and she knew someone was about to do something that couldn't be undone. Stop, she shouted, running between the two men. Just stop. This isn't solving anything. Both men froze, their hands on their weapons, their eyes locked in mutual hatred. There has to be another way, Eliza continued, her mind racing. Some way to settle this without anyone getting hurt. Margaret laughed bitterly. The only way to settle this is for you to accept reality, child. We're your parents. We have rights. Rights? Sarah's voice was ice cold. What about Eliza's rights? Her right to safety, to love, to a family that actually wants her. We want her, William insisted, but something in his tone made Eliza look closer at his face. There was desperation there, something that didn't match his confident words. Why? She asked quietly. Why do you want me back now? You didn't want me 8 months ago. William and Margaret exchanged a quick glance, and in that moment, Eliza saw the truth. This wasn't about love or family or even legal rights. This was about something else entirely. Because, she said slowly, understanding dawning like sunrise, you need me for something. Don't you? This isn't about wanting me back. This is about needing an extra pair of hands for whatever work you found in Oregon. William's face went red. Don't be ridiculous. But Eliza could see she'd hit the target. That's it, isn't it? You found work that requires more people and you remembered you had a daughter you could put to use. Free labor. That's enough, Margaret snapped. Children don't question their parents' motives. I'm not questioning, Eliza said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I'm stating facts. You threw me away when I was inconvenient and now you want me back because I'm useful. Well, I'm not property you can pick up and put down whenever you feel like it. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of wind through the tall grass and the distant lowing of cattle. Everyone stood frozen in their positions, the weight of truth hanging heavy between them. Finally, Samuel spoke, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. She's not going with you. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. You want to fight this in court? Fine. We'll see what Judge Morrison thinks when he hears the whole story. William's hand tightened on his gun. You can't keep her from us forever, Mackenzie. Maybe not, Samuel replied. But I can try. And I will try with everything I have. Margaret climbed back onto the wagon, her face hard as granite. This isn't over. Blood is blood and the law will side with blood. But as they drove away, leaving only dust and bitter words behind, Eliza wondered if blood really was thicker than water, or if love might be stronger than both. The storm clouds on the horizon were growing darker, and she had the terrible feeling that the real battle was just beginning. The sound of wagon wheels on frozen ground made Samuel's coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips. Through the kitchen window, he watched a familiar shape emerge from the morning mist, a shape that made his blood run cold and his hand reach instinctively for the rifle mounted above the door. Eliza, he called softly, never taking his eyes off the approaching wagon. Come here. Now. She appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her apron from the bread she'd been kneading. The moment she saw his face, her own went pale. What is it? Your parents. The words hit her like a physical blow. For 3 years, she'd built a life here. 3 years of helping Samuel with the cattle, learning to read by lamplight, growing from a scared child into a young woman who knew her own mind. 3 years of believing she was safe. William Hartwell climbed down from the wagon with a confident swagger that made Samuel's jaw clench. Behind him, Margaret remained seated, her face hidden beneath a worn bonnet. But it was the third figure that made Samuel's heart sink, Sheriff Davis, his badge gleaming in the weak sunlight. Samuel Mackenzie. William's voice boomed across the yard. We've come for our daughter. Eliza gripped the window frame so hard her knuckles went white. They can't just take me, can they? She whispered. Samuel's silence was answer enough. The 3 men approached the house with the slow, deliberate pace of people who believed they held all the cards. William had filled out since leaving, his coat was new, his boots polished. Whatever work he'd found in Oregon had been good to him. Morning, Mackenzie, Sheriff Davis said as Samuel stepped onto the porch. I'm here on official business. I figured. Samuel's rifle stayed within easy reach. What kind of business? William stepped forward, pulling papers from his coat pocket. The kind that says you've been keeping my daughter from her rightful family for 3 years. The kind that says it's time for that to end. Inside the house, Eliza pressed her ear to the door, her heart hammering so loud she was sure the whole county could hear it. Every word felt like a nail in a coffin she thought she'd escaped. The girl was abandoned, Samuel said, his voice deadly quiet. Left to die in a blizzard while you ran off to save your own hides. Times were hard, Margaret called from the wagon, finally speaking up. We did what we had to do to survive. Now we're back, and we want our family whole again. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. The law's pretty clear on this, Mackenzie. Parents have rights. Unless you can prove they're unfit. Unfit? Samuel's laugh was bitter. They left a 12-year-old child alone with no food in the middle of winter. How much more unfit do you need? That was an emergency situation, William said smoothly. We always planned to come back once we got settled. A man's got to do what's best for his family's future, even if it means sacrificing the weakest member. Samuel's hand moved closer to his rifle. The sheriff noticed the movement and shifted nervously. Now, let's keep this civil. The fact is, Mackenzie, you've got no legal claim to the girl. Blood is blood, and these are her blood parents. Eliza couldn't stand it anymore. She burst through the door, her face flushed with anger and fear. I'm standing right here. Stop talking about me like I'm a piece of property. William's face lit up with what might have been genuine pleasure. Eliza, look how you've grown. Margaret, come see our girl. But Eliza took a step back, moving closer to Samuel. I'm not your girl. Not anymore. Now, honey, Margaret had climbed down from the wagon, her arms outstretched. Don't be like that. We're your parents. We love you. You love me. Eliza's voice cracked with emotion. You left me to die. We left you in a warm cabin with food, William began. No food. Eliza shouted. The barrel was empty. The fire was dying. I was alone for 3 days before Mr. Mackenzie found me. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Maybe we should. She's coming with us, William interrupted, his voice harder now. Today. We've got legal papers, Sheriff. Do your job. Samuel stepped between William and Eliza. Over my dead body. That can be arranged, William said, and suddenly there was a gun in his hand, a small pistol that had been hidden in his coat. I didn't come all this way to leave empty-handed. The sheriff's hand moved to his own weapon. Put that away, Hartwell. This doesn't need to get ugly. It got ugly 3 years ago when this man stole my daughter, William snarled. I'm taking back what's mine. But Eliza surprised them all by stepping forward, placing herself between the two men. Stop it. All of you, just stop. Her voice carried such authority that even William hesitated. In that moment, she looked older than her 15 years, a young woman who had faced death and chosen life on her own terms. You want to know what's mine? She continued, looking directly at her father. My life is mine. My choices are mine. And I choose to stay here with the man who saved me when my own parents wouldn't. William's gun wavered. You don't understand what you're saying. We're your family. Family doesn't abandon family, Eliza said quietly. Family doesn't leave children to starve. Family chooses to stay even when it's hard. Margaret began to cry soft, pitiful sobs that might have moved Eliza once. But 3 years of Samuel's steady presence had taught her the difference between real tears and manipulative ones. We made mistakes, Margaret pleaded. But we're here now. We want to make it right. Some mistakes can't be made right, Samuel said. Some bridges burn so completely there's no crossing back. The sheriff looked from one group to the other, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Look, maybe we can work something out. Some kind of arrangement. What kind of arrangement? William demanded, his gun still drawn but no longer pointed directly at anyone. The girl's got a voice in this, the sheriff said slowly. She's old enough to speak her mind. If she truly wants to stay. She's 15. Margaret cried. She's still a child. I was 12 when you left me, Eliza said. If I was old enough to die alone, I'm old enough to choose my own family. William's face flushed red. You ungrateful little Careful, Samuel warned, his voice like winter wind. That's my daughter you're talking about. The words hung in the air like a challenge. William's gun swung toward Samuel, but the sheriff was faster, his own weapon drawn and pointed at William's chest. Drop it, Hartwell. Now. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind whistling through the fence posts and Margaret's quiet sobbing. Then William slowly lowered his gun, his shoulders sagging in defeat. This isn't over, he said, but the fight had gone out of his voice. We'll take this to the territorial court. We'll get lawyers. You do that, Samuel said. And while you're explaining to a judge why you abandoned your child, I'll be telling them how I found her half dead and forgotten. The sheriff holstered his weapon and looked at Eliza with something like respect. Girl, you sure about this? Once this gets to court, there's no taking it back. Eliza looked at Samuel, this gruff, kind man who had given her not just food and shelter, but the chance to become who she was meant to be. Then she looked at her parents, strangers now, wearing familiar faces but carrying none of the love she remembered. I've never been more sure of anything, she said. As her parents climbed back onto their wagon, William's final words carried across the yard like a curse. Don't think this is finished, Mackenzie. Blood will tell in the end. But as Eliza watched them disappear into the morning mist, she wondered if they understood that she'd already chosen which blood mattered most, the blood that had abandoned her, or the family that had chosen to keep her heart beating. 6 months later, Eliza stood in the territorial courthouse wearing the only dress she owned, her hands shaking as she watched Judge Harrison review the papers spread across his bench. The courtroom smelled of tobacco and old wood, and every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo her thundering heartbeat. "Miss Hartwell," the judge said, looking at her over his spectacles, "do you understand why we are here today?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was steady, though everything inside her felt like a storm. "My birth parents want me back, and I want to stay with Mr. Mackenzie." Samuel sat beside her, his best shirt pressed and his hair combed, but she could see the worry in his eyes. Across the aisle, William and Margaret Hartwell sat with their lawyer, a thin man from Helena who looked like he'd never missed a meal in his life. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, standing with theatrical flair, "this is a simple case of parental rights. My clients made a temporary arrangement during a harsh winter, entrusting their daughter to Mr. Mackenzie's care. Now they've returned to reclaim their child." "Temporary arrangement?" Samuel half rose from his chair, but the judge's sharp look made him sit back down. Judge Harrison studied the papers again. "Mr. Hartwell, can you explain to the court exactly what happened 3 years ago?" William stood, his new clothes making him look prosperous and responsible. "Your Honor, we faced an impossible choice. The winter was brutal, food was scarce, and we had to find work to support our family. We left Eliza in a safe place with supplies, intending to return as soon as we could." "Supplies?" Samuel couldn't stay quiet any longer. "There was no food in that cabin. The fire was dying. I found her half dead from starvation." "Order." Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Mr. Mackenzie, you'll have your turn to speak." But Eliza had heard enough. She stood up, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Your Honor, may I say something?" The judge looked surprised. "Young lady, this is most unusual." "Please," she said, and something in her voice made him nod. Eliza turned to face the courtroom, seeing familiar faces from town mixed with strangers who'd come to watch the spectacle. Her stomach churned, but she forced herself to speak clearly. "My father says they left me in a safe place with supplies. That's not true. The flour barrel was empty. The woodpile was gone. The fire was down to embers. I spent 3 days alone, getting weaker and weaker, thinking I was going to die." Margaret began to cry again, but Eliza continued. "Mr. Mackenzie found me collapsed on the floor. He carried me to his ranch and nursed me back to health. He didn't have to do that. He could have taken me to town and let someone else deal with me. But he didn't. He chose to save me." William's lawyer started to object, but Judge Harrison waved him silent. "For 3 years," Eliza continued, "Mr. Mackenzie has been my family. He taught me to read and write. He taught me to work hard and be proud of what I accomplish. He taught me that I have value, not because of who my parents are, but because of who I choose to become." She looked directly at William and Margaret. "You say you love me, but love doesn't abandon people. Love doesn't leave children to starve. Love chooses to stay even when it's hard." The courtroom was so quiet that Eliza could hear her own breathing. Judge Harrison leaned forward in his chair. "Miss Hartwell, the law is clear about parental rights, but in cases involving abandonment." He paused, studying her face. "Tell me, if I ordered you to return to your birth parents today, what would you do?" Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Everything depended on her next words. "I'd run away," she said simply. "I'd keep running until I found my way back to the only real father I've ever known." William jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, she's been poisoned against us. Mackenzie has filled her head with lies." "Have I?" Samuel stood slowly, his weathered hands gripping the rail in front of him. "Have I lied about finding her half dead? Have I lied about the empty food barrels and the cold hearth? Have I lied about spending 3 years watching her grow from a broken child into a strong young woman?" He turned to face the judge. "Your Honor, I'm not a perfect man. I'm a bachelor rancher who never expected to raise a daughter. But I know what love looks like, and it doesn't look like abandonment." Judge Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his desk. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, the evidence suggests that your daughter was indeed abandoned in life-threatening circumstances. While the law recognizes parental rights, it does not protect parents who fail in their fundamental duty to protect their children." William's face went white. "But she's our daughter, eh?" "Was your daughter," the judge corrected. "The moment you chose to leave her alone to die, you forfeited any claim to that relationship." He looked at Eliza with something like admiration. "Young lady, you've shown remarkable courage and wisdom in these proceedings. While you're still legally a minor, your voice carries weight in this decision." Eliza held her breath. "Therefore," Judge Harrison continued, "I'm awarding permanent guardianship of Miss Eliza Hartwell to Mr. Samuel Mackenzie with full legal adoption to follow when she reaches the age of majority." The gavel came down like thunder, and suddenly Eliza was in Samuel's arms, both of them trying not to cry in front of the whole courthouse. Behind them, she could hear Margaret's sobs and William's angry voice arguing with their lawyer. But none of that mattered now. She was home, legally, officially, forever. Later, as they walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sunlight, Samuel stopped and looked down at her. "You know what this means, don't you?" "What?" "You're stuck with me now. No more running away when I make you do chores." Eliza laughed, the first real laugh she'd had in months. "I think I can live with that." As they climbed into their wagon for the journey home, she saw William and Margaret standing by their own wagon, looking lost and defeated. For just a moment, she felt sorry for them. They were her parents, after all. They'd given her life. But Samuel had given her something more precious, the chance to choose what that life would become. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. As they pulled into the yard, Eliza saw something that made her gasp. A small crowd had gathered on the porch, neighbors and friends from town, all holding dishes of food and wearing broad smiles. Mrs. Patterson from the general store stepped forward with a cake that read, "Welcome home, Eliza." "How did you all know?" she asked, climbing down from the wagon. "Good news travels fast in small towns," Mrs. Patterson said, pulling her into a warm hug. "We wanted to celebrate properly." As the evening wore on, filled with laughter and good food and the warmth of people who'd chosen to call her family, Eliza understood something important. She'd spent 3 years worried that her birth parents might come back and take her away from the life she'd built. But she'd been thinking about it all wrong. They couldn't take away what she'd built because it wasn't built on their permission or their presence. It was built on choice, her choice, Samuel's choice, and the choice of everyone who'd gathered here tonight to celebrate her belonging. Standing on the porch as the last guests departed, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Montana sky, Eliza felt something she'd never experienced before, complete and utter peace with who she was and where she belonged. "Thank you," she said quietly to Samuel as he stood beside her. "For what?" "For seeing something worth saving in a half-dead child. For teaching me that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. For choosing me." Samuel put his arm around her shoulders and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the night claim the valley that had become their world. In the distance, a coyote howled, wild and free and utterly certain of its place in the world. Eliza smiled, understanding exactly how it felt.